I've been asked by several persons how I go about creating this style of Celtic art, so I decided to make a YouTube about it. We just zoom in there, you can see the type of graphic that I've made, and it follows this regular pattern of the paths going under and over alternately, and it just makes quite a nice piece of wall art. So we'll get started and I'll show you how I go about creating this. I use several methods, many of which you'll find useful in other ways when you're using Inkscape, but this type of pattern is difficult to construct initially, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to do variations and use different numbers of loops in your artwork. So let's get started. Okay, let's get started. First of all, I'm using Inkscape version 0.92, and if you click on help and go to about Inkscape, it'll tell you what version you're using there. I'm going to go to File and Document Properties, and throughout this tutorial I'll be mentioning the keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts in Inkscape and a lot of graphic applications will enable you to work much more quickly than you would be able to just using the mouse alone. But for the purposes of this video, I'll be using the mouse so that you can see where everything is in Inkscape. So we'll go to Document Properties. I'm going to untick Page Border. We don't need a page at this stage. And the units are already set to millimeters, and that's all we need for the time being. So we'll close that down. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'll set the view, zoom, I'm just going to set it to 1 to 2, but I will be changing the zoom setting using the mouse roller and the shift key. That enables me to zoom in and out. So I'm going to drag into guides, and if you hold your mouse just on the ruler at the side of the page and click and drag, you can pull a guide out, and the same goes for a horizontal guide. You go to the top of the page, click and drag, and we now have a vertical and a horizontal guide. I'm also going to set the snapping modes. I'm not going to explain snapping at the moment, but that should become clear as we work through the tutorial. So I'll turn snapping on, and I'll turn the snap nodes, paths and handles on. And make sure all of these are turned on. I'm also going to turn on snap to page, because we'll be using that later, and snap to guides. Okay, that will do for setting up the work area. Okay, I did forget to mention while I was talking about it, the keyboard shortcut for Document Properties is on the left of any menu item. So for Document Properties, it is Shift, hold down the Shift, hold down Control and press D, D for Delta, or D for Document. Okay, right, first thing I'm going to do is set up a rectangle, and I'm going to drag it from the intersection of these two guidelines I'm not particularly concerned about the size of it for the moment, because I'm going to adjust that precisely later on. I don't want a border. For every object that you draw in Inkscape, it has a fill, which is this red part here, and a border, which is the yellow part here. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off the border. I don't need it, and it will actually interfere with what I'm going to do next. So to turn the border off, you can hold down the Shift key and press this X in the corner here. So hold down the Shift, press the X, and the border disappears. This is what we call an object in Inkscape. It's not actually a path at the moment, and I need it to be a path. So if we go to the menu up here and go to Path and Object to Path, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift plus Control plus C. And when I click on that, you'll see that these nodes around the outside disappear. If I then click on this tool here, which is Edit Path by Nodes, and the keyboard shortcut for that is F2. If I click on that, some new nodes appear around it, and we'll be using those later on. Okay, I'll just go back to the Select tool up here on the left hand side. The keyboard shortcut for that is F1. And now I want to set the size of this path precisely. So I'm going to highlight the width up here and set that to 50 millimeters. Make sure that this padlock icon is not clicked, and it's indicated by being an open padlock. If I click it, it goes closed. It needs to be open. And then I'll highlight the height, and I need that to be 100 millimeters. I'll hold down the Control key and scroll out. I think I said that was the Shift key earlier on. I apologise for my mistake. I'm now going to move this object by clicking and dragging it until this top left hand corner is abutted to the two guidelines here. And for some reason that is not snapping to the guidelines, but we'll sort that out in a minute. So I've just noticed the reason why this path is not snapping to the guidelines is that this button up here, Snap to Guides, is not switched on. If I do it now, you can see it jumps so that it's touching the guidelines, and if I zoom in, you can see it's very precise, very precisely up to the guidelines. Now I'm going to make another guideline and drag it down to the bottom of this rectangle. This rectangle is not going to appear in the final artwork. It's just being used for construction. So I'll go up to the ruler, click and drag and pull down a horizontal guideline, and the guide snaps nicely to the edge of that rectangle. I'll just zoom in and make doubly sure. Yes, it is. Okay. Now I'm going to duplicate this path, and if we go up to Path and Edit and Duplicate, the keyboard shortcut for that is Control plus D. So that is now two rectangles, one on top of the other. I'm going to change the colour of the second rectangle by simply clicking on one of these colours down here. Let's make it green. And I'm going to change the size of that. I'm not particularly concerned about the width of it, but I do need to make the height 25 millimeters. And if you're wondering where these figures have come from, They are figures that I've worked out by trial and error, so you've got the benefit of some of my mistakes that I've made if you want to follow this on your own PC. I'm now going to drag that to the side and drag down another guide to the top of that green rectangle. And there we go. And I want one more guide. Actually, I need two more guides to finish off the construction. So I'm going to drag a vertical guide to the other side of the rectangle, and the last one to the center of this rectangle, and it pops up with a helpful note saying guide origin to object midpoint. So that's, and now it's moved. I'm going to zoom in to make sure that's positioned accurately. To reposition a guide, simply move your mouse over it till it becomes a hand pointing a finger and drag it across. You can't see it because the object's red. Just drag it off the page. I'll change the colour of this and make it yellow so that I can see the guideline. It doesn't matter what colour it is, it's purely arbitrary. And there we are, we've got the object to midpoint. Zoom back out again, and we are ready to start drawing some actual art, I think. Now I'm going to draw an ellipse using this rectangle as a guide. So we go over here to the ellipse tool, and the keyboard shortcut for that is F5. Click on that, and when you get to a snap point, you'll see that a little red diagonal cross appears, showing that it's going to snap to whatever point it's close to. So I'm going to click, hold my mouse and drag to the other corner, and it's unfortunately drawn a yellow ellipse, which is what the colour was set to before. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the select tool and change the colour by clicking on one of these down here. We'll make it a blue colour. And at the moment it appears as though it's got no stroke. Now it's possible that it may have a very small stroke that's too small to see. So if I go across to the fill and stroke panel, and to open that up, the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift, Control and F for fill. And this shows the fill colour and any special effects, the blur of it and the opacity of it down here. And it also shows the stroke paint, and at the moment you can see that this X is highlighted and it says no paint, so there is no fill, there is no stroke applied to this object at the moment. The third tab just gives you the width of the stroke, and again it's set to 0 because we don't have a stroke. So that's what we want. Now I want to change the centre of rotation of this new path. So before I do that, to make things easier to see, I'm going to change the opacity of this ellipse by dragging down the opacity. I'm going to make it about 50%. That will do. And if I click and drag this, you can see the opacity has been reduced to put it back to where it was. By the way, if you want to undo something, another keyboard shortcut is Control and Z, and that undoes the last action that you did, which you will find very, very, very useful. While I'm talking about keyboard shortcuts, another very, very useful keyboard shortcut is the one that enables you to save your work. This particular drawing is called YouTube tutorial. To save it, you can go to File and Save, but the keyboard shortcut for that, if you don't learn any other keyboard shortcuts, learn the Save keyboard shortcut, which is Control and S. And if you look at the title up here of your creation, if there is unsaved edit within the work, there will be an asterisk at the side of it. If it's recently been saved and there are no more changes been made to it, the asterisk will disappear, so that's a quick indication for you. Okay, right, if you click an object using the Select and Transform Objects tool, you get these arrows here which enables you to change the size of an object. If you then click it again, you'll see that these arrows change to rotation things, and they allow you to rotate the object about its centre, which is this little cross here. And by default, the centre of an object goes to the centre of the bounding box, and the bounding box of an object or path is this rectangular thing here. If I move that up to 45 degrees approximately, you'll see the bounding box changes its size and shape, but the centre point is always the centre of the bounding box. That's important to know because some geometric shapes, for example a triangle or a pentagon, will not have the geometric centre of the shape coincident with the centre of the bounding box, and that can cause you some problems. I'm going to undo those two rotates by pressing Ctrl Z once and Ctrl Z again, so we're back to its vertical position. We're still in rotation mode, indicated by these black curved handles. Now I want to move this centre of rotation to the intersection of this 25mm guide and the centre guide. So if I carefully click on that, let's zoom in before we do that, and just grab that by clicking and dragging, and then move it over here, and you see it snaps nicely onto that intersection. I can actually get rid of this 25mm box now. I don't need it. Actually, I've just noticed something. This guide is not actually snapped to the top of that box, and I'm going to zoom in and pull that guideline down, because this is fairly important. So I'm glad I didn't move that before. To pan the screen about, I should mention, if you hold down the scroll button on the mouse, the central roller, you can drag the screen about when you're zoomed in like this. That's a very useful thing. It saves you using the slider bars, which are at present not visible. There is a way to show hide scroll bars. There it is. Keyboard shortcut for that is Control B. If I click on that, you can see we have these scroll bars at the side here, and that enables us to move the drawing, but it's much easier to do it with the mouse scroll wheel. So I'm going to turn that off again. Show hide and scroll bars, Control B. Right, I'm going to have to set the rotation of this again because it's going to be slightly out. So I'll click again on the ellipse, click again to show the centre of rotation. Let's zoom in really closely, click and drag, and now it's definitely set at 25mm. So the next thing I want to do is give that a stroke. So we'll give it a green stroke, and I'll point to green, hold down the shift key and click it, and now it's got a green stroke. I want the width of that stroke to be 9mm. So we'll go over to the fill and stroke palette at the side here. Highlight the width and just type 9 in there and hit enter. And something else that I can do to this, I don't need the fill. So I simply go to this X and without pressing any keys, click on that and the fill has disappeared. I can get rid of the two rectangles as well. So I click on the green one, hold the shift key and click on the yellow one to select them both together and just hit the delete key and they've disappeared now. So we have this ellipse, and what I want to do now is rotate this about its centre, which if you remember is down here. So to do that I need to go to the transform palette, and to open up the transform palette on the right hand side here you use the keyboard shortcut Shift, Control and M, or you can go to View, Show Hide, and no, it's not that one. Have to look that one up because I always use the keyboard shortcut for that. However, we'll look at that later on. So we'll go to the transform palette, I'll just click on that there, scroll up and it is placed at the top, and if you divide 360 degrees, a complete circle, by 5, you get 72 degrees. Why do we want divide by 5? Because we're going to make a 5-looped pattern. So just go to the rotate tab up here and enter 72. Now before I rotate it I need to duplicate this object. So if you remember, the keyboard shortcut for that is Control and D. So that has now been duplicated. If I now click apply, it will rotate that by 72 degrees, and it has done that. I need to duplicate that again. So Control and D and apply again. I need to repeat that again. So Control and D and apply again, and once more Control and D and apply again. So that is a quick demonstration of how useful keyboard shortcuts can be. I mentioned opening the transform palette earlier on. If you go to object, you can see transform down near the bottom here, and the keyboard shortcuts there as well. So if it's not open in this left hand palette here, that's where you can find it. Also under object you've got the fill and stroke palette, Shift, Control, F. We're going to be using the layers palette, that is actually under layers. Go down to the bottom, it's Shift, Control and L, fairly easy to remember that one, etc. As I say, I always use keyboard shortcuts where possible, so I do tend to forget whereabouts they are in the menu up here, so you'll have to forgive me for that, but I do find them eventually. Right, the next thing I need to do is set up some more guidelines, or adjust some guidelines, and I need one at the intersection of these two loops here. Let's make life a little bit easier before we go on and change all these to different colours. So I'll do them right to left from this violet one. I changed the fill rather than the stroke. So I'm going to undo that, Control Z, hold the shift key down and the stroke is set to violet. Click on the next one going anti-clockwise. I'll set that to blue, shift and click on the blue. Next one I will use light blue, shift and click. With this one we will set to teal, shift and click. No, I don't like that, it's too much like the other two. I'm going to set it to dark green. And the last one we will set to red. So that allows us to see things a little bit better. So now I'm going to drag a horizontal guide down to the intersection between the green and the red loops. So just click on the ruler again and drag, and you can see guide origin to guide path intersection. It tells you helpfully about that. And I need this guide here, this vertical guide, to be the intersection of the blue and the light blue. So let's just scroll into that, zoom into that using the scroll wheel and the control key, and we'll get the hand on it, and there we are at the intersection. Scroll out again, zoom out using the scroll and the wheel, and we'll zoom into this side and do the same here. Move until we get a hand on the guideline, and there we go at the intersection. I'll just go to the top as well and make sure that this horizontal line is on the top intersection of the path. There we go. And I think we're ready to, no, there's a couple of other things I need to do. If I zoom out a little bit. I don't need the pink and the light blue ellipses anymore. So I'll click on that and hit delete. Click on that and hit delete. And as I mentioned before, there is an asterisk at the side of the title up here, so it's not been saved recently, so I'm going to do Control and S, and I've saved that. Now I'm going to create a new layer, and the new layer will contain the final artwork, and the layer that I'm on now will just be used for construction purposes. So if you go into the layers palette down here and click on that, that moves to the top, and you can see we've got one layer here. These two buttons here, the first one, the eye, shows or hides the layer. If I click on that, anything on the layer disappears. If I click on the padlock, it locks everything on that layer. I'm going to lock that. Now I can't move anything, I can't change any colours, I can't select anything. Everything is locked in place. And the only thing I can move is the guidelines, because they are independent of layers. So I just press Ctrl Z to get rid of that. Now I'm going to create a new layer, and the way I do that is click on this create new layer icon here, and I'm going to leave it named as layer 2. No, let's change it. If I just highlight it and type in pattern, and I'm happy to have it above the current layer, so I'll click add, and there it is. So anything I draw now, I need to have that highlighted. As it turns out, we're only using 2 layers in this drawing, and that one's locked, so it won't allow me to draw on the lower layer. But sometimes when you're drawing things, you have several layers, and it's as well to pay attention to which layer you're putting things on. I've just noticed that I have forgotten to put something on my construction layer. I'm going to go back to layer 1 and unlock it, and I need to drag down one more guideline, and I'm going to put it level with the top of the green and the red ellipses. I'll just click and drag that down. I'm going to zoom in to get it to snap to it accurately. Just get the select tool. It's not really important. What I'm looking for is two more intersections here and here, so we'll leave it at that. I'll lock that layer again and go back to the pattern layer and get the Bezier tool. Click on that, and whichever tool you're using, it's important to pay attention to the mode, which is up here, and you need to have the Create Regular Bezier Path mode selected, but make sure none of these are selected, because if they are, you'll get some strange results. Make sure the shape is set to none, and that's true of any of the tools here. If you go on to the rectangle tool, you get different settings up here. If we go on to the spiral tool, you get the number of turns, the divergence, the radius, etc, etc. We'll go back to the Draw Bezier curves and lines, and we will start off at this bottom intersection here. Just click at the intersection, scroll up to this intersection up here. Just going to zoom in a bit using the scroll wheel and control, and click on that. Hold the scroll wheel down and drag so that we can pan the screen, and click on this top intersection up here. Hold down the scroll wheel and drag to pan down to this one. And I'm just going to scroll out a bit again, and when we get back to the start of the path that we've drawn, this node here turns red, and I can click on that, and we now have the stroke drawn to make a new path. It's purely stroke, it doesn't have a fill. Now click on the second one down, the Edit by Paths node, and these are all buttons that you can press to change the characteristics of a path. I'm not going to use those at the moment. I'm going to scroll out a little bit, and what I'm going to do is click and drag on these lines to form curves between the two nodes here and here. Just find the midpoint and pull it out and get it to the center of the path formed by this blue ellipse and this green ellipse. You don't need to worry at this stage about being too fantastically accurate. You'll see why in a few minutes. Do the same with this one. And do the same on the opposite side. There we go. Same again here. Okay. This node up here, I'm going to alter its characteristics. So I click on it when it's turned red. That is now selected. You'll see it's got two adjuster handles pointing out from it. Those enable you to change the shape quite precisely, but I don't want to use those at the moment. What I do want to do is click this button here, which makes the selected node or nodes smooth. So I click on that, and it gives us a nice round path. These two nodes here somewhat flatten the figure, so now that I've constructed it, I don't need them anymore. I want to select them both. So to select them both together, I can go off to one side and click and drag diagonally to select them both. and then press the delete key, and they've disappeared. That has somewhat messed up my drawing. I don't know why that happened, but I'm not worried about it. I can move that back to there so that it's approximately the same distance as this handle is from the node. As I said before, being extremely accurate at this stage is not really a problem. This node at the bottom is going to stay sharp.